quiero watch this news.
The breaking news because Yemen's Houthi rebels,
they could attack a commercial ship and could bog the strait up for weeks, if not months.
There is a part of the world that everyone is keeping an eye on right now.
The joint military strikes were in response to nearly 2 months of attacks by the Iran-backed Houthi movement on cargo ships in the Red Sea.
It is becoming more and more important for the global rivalries and tensions that are heating up on our globe right now. It is this choke point in the Red Sea.
Oh shit, yeah, where Somalia's at? Somalia's on the corner here, no?
Yeah. It's pretty small, it's a few dozen kilometers wide. But through this little choke point flows a lot of important things. The internet, millions of barrels of oil per day, 30% of all container ships that connect global markets. And this choke point is surrounded by unstable situations.
Oh no, I had
countries
it. I had
that
it
are
right
in civil wars, rebel militias, proxy wars, unstable governments, failed states, and pirates. In recent decades, pirates have hijacked thousands of ships here, extracting hundreds of millions of dollars in ransoms, a topic we did a whole deep dive on in another video. And lately, as war has raged in the Gaza Strip, the fiercely anti-Western Houthi rebels in Yemen have been firing rockets at cargo ships traveling through this water, leading the US and UK to strike back.
A ship attacked by Iran-backed Houthi rebels last month sank in the Red Sea.
The region is vital, yet volatile all at once. And yet, in the middle of all of this, is this one beacon of stability. A little piece of land that is easy to miss, but that is...
No, here's the point. Guys. Throwing rockets at ships isn't like piracy. Like,
more important than you might think. It is the country of Djibouti.
What I meant earlier is like, is pirates like hijacks? It's not the same thing.
Djibouti is this small, arid country right on the choke point, and it is home to the militaries of the United States, of several European powers, of Japan, Japan's only foreign military base, by the way, and right down the road from the American base, China's first military base outside of its country.
What the fuck?
Qatar has peacekeepers here, the United Arab Emirates ran the biggest port, Eritrea seized some of its territory recently, and Ethiopia, one of the largest countries in Africa, runs almost all of its trade through Djibouti. Ethiopia is landlocked and this is their gateway to the world. It's a lot. Djibouti is a lot. There's a lot going on in Djibouti, which is why today we are talking about this place. I want to explore why so many powers want to be here. Why everyone is converging on this little tiny patch of land the size of New Jersey. And I want to ask if little Djibouti, one of the poorest countries in the world, can balance all these rival powers against each other without falling victim to them.
You know, 10 to 15% of global trade moves through the Red Sea.
Why didn't he say?
We will not hesitate to defend lives and the free flow of commerce.
It's like a commerce choke point.
Hey, I'm gonna pause really quick. I'm actually excited about today's sponsor because it's a tool that I have wanted to continue to get the word out that more balanced news consumption in Djibouti. This little choke point is called the Bab al-Mandeb, or Gate of Tears. It used to be nothing but a recipe for shipwrecks. It was known mostly for strong winds, unpredictable cross currents, and shallow reefs that made navigating it dangerous. And it wasn't very valuable because if you go through it, you just end up in the Red Sea, which was a dead end for most of history. That is until a French company miraculously cut a canal through this part of Egypt and changed the world forever, nearly halving the time that it would take for Europeans to get to Asia, where they were all racing each other to conquer, colonize, and bring back unfathomable wealth to their countries.
I didn't know that.
The Suez Canal.
On paper chat, shouldn't there be a global forever tax that goes to France and people are going through there? I mean, I feel like they kind of pioneered the fucking
massive
spot,
upgrade to this hunt for resources. Was this video kind of an excuse for me to buy these really old, beautiful books about the Suez Canal? Yes, it was. For France, this engineering miracle called the Suez Canal was their chance to beat out their big rival, the British Empire, who was clearly winning the race, dominating the routes to Asia before Suez opened. The canal was supposed to change that. So now you have a new front in this race, a scramble for control over this new route to Asia. This windy little choke point was no longer just the Gate of Tears. It was an important bit of water, one of the most important on Earth, at least for the empires. They had to keep an eye on it. So the British take this little island right at the choke point. They put a lighthouse on it.
The British, brother.
They also take control of a port just south of the choke point.
Chat, the British were everywhere. They did everything, yet they have nothing. I'm confused.
The Italians then show up and purchase this bit of coastline from local sultans, eventually taking over this whole stretch of coast called Eritrea. And the French would start fixating on this strip of sparsely populated coast right on the banks of the choke point, the land that would become Djibouti. The sultans here told the French that yes, they could have a bit of this newly strategic land in exchange for protection. The locals here knew what was going on. The great empires were all scrambling and racing, and they were going to use their prime real estate to get what they wanted, to leverage the situation. Smart, and totally a theme throughout this video. So the French set up their colony. They call it Côte Française des Somalie, or French Somaliland. This choke point would become a key base for projecting.
Chat, when it's a DE, most English people chat always say de. It's chat. It's not de. It's de. The E goes down, not up.
Power and refueling on their way to.
It's not how to say it. Everybody says it all the time. It's such a small difference.
France would hold on to their little colonial invention for a long time. Even as the world would decolonize after World War II, France held on to this strategic colony along the choke point. Until eventually, the locals rose up, there were protests, they clashed with the local authorities, and it led to an independence vote. And in 1977, Djibouti became a new country. Djibouti was independent, but they had a problem. In the words of some New York Times reporting from 1977, the tiny new nation had no army, less than 1 square mile of arable land, and no resources except for sand, salt, and 20,000 camels. Yeah, not good. So,
a lot of camels though.
Once again, they made a deal with France. Djibouti wouldn't be France's anymore, but they would be allowed to retain a military base in the country in exchange for security and protection, as well as economic aid. But this didn't change the fact that Djibouti had very little natural resources or arable land. Their economy fell into a crippling depression. Eventually there was a civil war, and it wasn't looking good for Djibouti. Djibouti's salvation would eventually come when they realized that they should hearken back to the old days and start exploiting the thing that had made them valuable all those years ago: their location.
Let's go! Go, Matt, go! Stop shooting, Matt! The plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
Our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
3 months after 9/11, the United States was about to come crashing into the Middle East in a new way, and they asked Djibouti if they could set up a base there. And Djibouti says yes.
Suddenly, after the global war on terror, America realizes that it's one of the key locations. It matters to be there. You had, Al-Qaeda in Yemen, you had Al-Qaeda in even Horn of Africa. So they needed a base, and Djibouti was one country which was willing to offer it.
It would become America's only permanent military base on the continent of Africa. And it would be a key jumping off point for George Bush's war on terror. And reminder that it's now the 21st century. Things have changed in the world, and this little choke point was becoming more valuable again, but for different reasons than the old days. Number one, the world had become addicted to fossil fuels. Oil and gas, which was the lifeblood of their economies. And most of that oil and gas was coming from
our whole country up, and now the US and China are hungry to take it.
You live there? You live in Djibouti?
Over here, from the land and waters of the countries around this Persian Gulf, where it was then put on ships and sent around the world, a lot of it heading west, through this vital choke point, up the Red Sea, into the Suez Canal. and onto Europe. The world knew that their energy was vulnerable because Egypt, in earlier decades, had weaponized the canal by closing it, by blocking it. One time for 8 years, inflicting immediate pain on the countries that rely on this constant flow of energy and goods.
Well,
by the way, semi-side note, this flow of energy becomes even more important when Europe almost entirely cuts ties with Russian natural gas after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. They have to get more natural gas from this region. Qatar was not sad about that, just put it that way. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Europe needs this route to stay stable. They need these little dots to keep flowing. So that's one reason that the choke point has become more vital than ever. The other reason is China. China rose to become a manufacturing superpower. They make a lot of stuff and they send it to the West, and a lot of that comes through this choke point. And all of this vital trade is happening in a region that is full of unstable governments, rising anti-Western militias, and Somali pirates, making this route precarious and dangerous and subject to problems. So Djibouti has become this vital place here at the choke point, an incredibly important strategic location in a sea of turmoil. Okay, but there's more. In addition to all of this global economy importance, there's also
some of these fucking boats are going on the land.
Regional importance to Djibouti. Notice Djibouti's neighbor, Ethiopia, the second most populous country in Africa, and, as you can see, one that is totally landlocked. It is not good to be a big country that is landlocked, because the water is where we trade. So, Djibouti is the gateway to Ethiopia's millions of people to trade with the world. 95% of Ethiopia's trade passes through Djibouti. So Djibouti, this colonial creation from France in the 1880s, is now, once again, an incredibly important place on the map. It's become, once again, a highly strategic location. And when there are highly strategic locations, superpowers start moving in. In 2011, Djibouti approved Japan, a pacifist sort of non-military country, to open a military base on Djibouti, their one and only foreign military base. Then you have Italy, who set up a military base here in 2013. Spain and Germany also have a military presence here. They are not permanently hosted with a base, they're actually hosted by France. And the soldiers live in these hotels permanently. Okay, that's not weird at all. But yeah, as you can see, the great powers are back. They're back in Djibouti like the old days. Not to compete with one another.
Isn't that to show presence, to secure that their ships and vessels go through and whatever?
But to all band together to police this vital choke point so that the global economy that has brought prosperity to all of us can stay stable, everything keeps flowing, everyone is happy. And this solved a big problem for Djibouti, who again, didn't have a big industry or any kind of resource. They make a lot of money off of these leases to foreign countries, which has helped build their economy. And, like the old days, when one side shows up, the rival won't be far behind.
China has agreed to set up a support base in Djibouti.
So the Chinese base is right here.
Guys, okay, maybe I'm wrong about this, guys. I think I'm always like pro-China, but I'm not. It's just more of a question. Chat, why is there's like 10 countries that were shown? Oh yeah, these are all making a base there. But whenever China makes a base, oh, that's the opponent, that's the rival. Aren't they all rivals?
Yeah, and they're going to be watching us as we're watching them.
In 2016, Djibouti announces that they've been talking to China and that they've agreed to give them land to open their own military base, which was built and opened right down the road from the American base in 2017. So China says they're there because of pirates. Pirates have been wreaking havoc in this area, so they're there to stabilize their economic interests because of pirates. But as we discovered in our deep dive on pirates, by 2017, the pirate issue was basically over. There was almost no hijackings in this region. I mean, look at this graph. Oh, and the Chinese base has this big, deep pier that is like large enough to handle an aircraft carrier and nuclear submarines. So this isn't about pirates. China also did the most China thing when they moved in here, which was instead of just building a base, they also came with all of these big ticket infrastructure projects as like gifts to win the favor of the locals. We're talking railway, pipelines, port. all very expensive, all putting Djibouti into a lot of debt to China. They're doing this all over Africa. Which
they do a lot, yeah, I was about to say, they do a lot of that in
Africa.
Africa.
Video we did on the topic, mapping all of China's giant infrastructure projects in Africa and what that means. And a lot of shout outs to other videos today, huh? So Djibouti is now the only place on Earth where the United States and China, these two rivals, have military bases right next to each other. And so far, everyone's been playing nice. There's been no shenanigans, other than both sides accusing each other of spying on each other constantly. Oh, and there was the lasers. The US says that China was pointing lasers into the eyes of pilots while they were taking off, which, like, if they really did that, that's just like, why would you do that? Like, why did you do that? Don't do that. Okay, but Djibouti doesn't let every country in. Russia wanted to have their own base in Djibouti, and Djibouti said no. It probably helped that the American National Security Advisor flew to Djibouti and told them that the US would double how much they're paying for their lease if Djibouti didn't let Russia in. Okay, but what about the people? Djibouti isn't just one big military base. There's almost 1 million people who live here. And their day-to-day probably consists of a lot of jet engine sounds. We got to talk to my old grad school professor, David Vine, who is an expert on U.S. military bases and how they affect the locals.
So what we were talking about is a foreign government, foreign military, occupying large swaths of land, fenced off, and hosting large amounts of weaponry, high-powered weaponry of many kinds.
Que tu ne peux rien faire, que tu n'as pas la force nécessaire pour les dégager de ton territoire. Là, c'est un risque pour la souveraineté et pour le peuple.
Because these bases are so close to like, the big city, there have been accidents, especially with drones. The US used to take off their drones and some would fall and actually crash onto like civilian infrastructure. So they had to open a separate airstrip.
Dont l'armée américaine, les voitures des armées américaines ont écrasé des cheptels ou des bétails ou des chameaux qui appartenaient à la population qui habite pas loin de leur base militaire.
This is occasionally running over cows. The soldiers mostly keep to themselves. US soldiers don't even go into the city to like buy stuff. All of it is flown in, creating a little slice of America right in Djibouti. Like, they don't even drink the water from Djibouti. It's all flown in.
C'est les jeudis soirs qu'on appelle nous les jeudis soirs. Parce que comme il y avait des nightclubs, les légionnaires, surtout les légionnaires des Français, sortaient le jeudi, ils avaient journée libre et ils venaient dans les nightclubs. Et quand ils ont abusé l'alcool, après, il y avait toujours, à leur sortie des nightclubs, il y avait toujours des problèmes. Le plus grand problème venait de là, en fait.
And then there's the dictator.
Well, I want to welcome President Gele and his delegation here today.
The U.S. base in particular, but also the French and Chinese bases, which are the largest of the collection, are all helping to prop up an undemocratic regime that has been accused of widespread human rights abuses.
Every time a foreign power makes a deal with Djibouti and pays them a lot of money in exchange for them being able to be there, they basically validate this terrible dictator who's been in power for 25 years. There's no real elections, free press, freedom of speech, plenty of human rights abuses. But on the other side, there's at least one way that regular people in Djibouti benefit from all of this. Fewer people go hungry today than at the conclusion of the Civil War. And even though the economy is still poor, all of this foreign aid still does support it. Is that worth it to them? I don't actually know. And another version of this video that I want to do someday is to go there and talk to the people and hear what their thoughts are about the bases in Djibouti and what that feels like to live so close to all of these foreign militaries. For now, we're talking about the geography, the history.
Because they need it, but then they're dependent on it. And then the countries do a bunch of mistakes and a bunch of dumb shit, and the people suffer. But since they're giving them money, they give them like a fucking pass on it. And sometimes it's like, it'd be like oil spills, accidents, whatever, and the population has like fucking like bunch of cancers and a bunch of diseases, all this shit, and like whatever, like they give us money, so it's and
the geopolitics.
Amazon, Somalia.
Okay, speaking of geopolitics, there's another angle to this story that is devilishly complicated to get into, and I'm not going to get into all the juicy details. You'll understand why when I start talking about it. It has to do with the regional geopolitics, the rivalries and the concerns and the issues of all of these countries that are right next to Djibouti, not just the outside powers. I want to just give you a little sampling of what this looks like because it's pretty wild. So you have all these Gulf countries, and some of them are not totally on the same team, but almost all of them are thinking about the future, and they're realizing that oil is not going to be a big part of their future, because oil is not going to be a big part of any of our future, hopefully. And they're realizing that they're going to need to invest in the...
So what if this overall region was more united together, and then they were more of a team? When they kind of go hard?
Horn of Africa. This region here, which they believe is probably going to be the future of their food, their future breadbasket. So hold that.
Because on paper, right? I always say this I always on paper, but actually on paper, with all the resources that they have in this overall area, they have like an absolute gold mine of everything, right? Because of all the conflicts and shit and all the whatever, it seems like they can't benefit that much from it.
They believe is probably going to be the future of their food, their future breadbasket. So hold that for a second, and then look at Ethiopia and Eritrea. Ethiopia, as we mentioned,
you know, like the trade for all the North America with Mexico. I don't know what it's called. If let's say they had it over here, they would have been massive.
Uses Djibouti as their gateway to the world. They need it to feed their millions of people. All of this geopolitics is also playing out in Djibouti, this little country that has to navigate everyone's interests. So here's a quick episode of this drama to give you an idea of what it looks like.
French is called Elena.
The United Arab Emirates, UAE, used to be like best friends with Djibouti. It was like one of their most important partners. The UAE built and owned this giant port that basically runs Djibouti's entire economy. But then the UAE got really close to Djibouti's neighbor and kind of enemy, Eritrea. This was very worrisome because Djibouti doesn't want Eritrea to become the new Djibouti. They're a mortal threat. They don't want the UAE to just shut down Djibouti's like strategic offering. Okay, fast forward to like 2017. The UAE, with their close friend Saudi Arabia, are in a feud with Qatar, which also has a military presence in Djibouti, right up here on this border. Now that Qatar and the UAE are fighting with each other, they turn to Djibouti and say, hey, you are too close with the UAE. We're out of here. Qatar takes their soldiers out of this border area, and right away, Eritrea takes some of this land from Djibouti. This may seem like some petty border skirmishes, but remember where we are here. This is the vital choke point, Bab al-Mandeb. Every inch of land matters. Every little conflict could be the spark that stops the global economy. And what this little flare-up shows us is how Djibouti finds itself in the center of conflicts between other countries that it kind of doesn't want to be in the middle of, but like has found itself in the middle of, because it hosts all of their militaries. But wait, there's more. Djibouti is actually really good at this. They know how to play the game and to play all these powers off of each other, and we'll see what happens next. So they're kind of beholden to the UAE. UAE has way too much leverage over them. So finally it all comes to a head, and they kick the UAE out from this really vital port. And they give a massive chunk of it to, wait for it, China. The new...
They can then hold USA and other major countries accountable, so no, they won't like it.
Oh, I don't
rival to Djibouti that no one wants to mess with. They now have the port. And Djibouti is now on their side, and the UAE can't do anything about it. Djibouti saved itself from one power by pleasing a bigger power. Do you see how this works? Do you see what game they're playing here?
Oh, yeah?
So, that is why this tiny country in East Africa is so important. It's kind of the definition of geopolitics, politics happening because of geography. To project legitimacy, this choke point is only going to become more important. Day by day, we're seeing it happen. I mean, like right now as I'm filming this, the Houthi rebels are like potentially cutting internet cables in this choke point.
3 crew members have been killed in a...
The first death since Houthi rebels began attacking shipping in the Red Sea.
After months of bombing merchant ships to punish the West for supporting the IDF war in Gaza. I mean, it's this kind of threat that Djibouti was set up to handle. That is why all these foreign militaries are here. And yet, for me, there is a subtler threat that is emerging here, which you can see when you just look at this map of bases. Djibouti hosts rival countries during a time when we are transitioning away from a rules-based order where all the great powers have an incentive to work together under one system that is dominated by the United States, that deeply benefits the United States and its allies, but that works because the United States imposes and protects those rules. Those rules are being challenged. And what is emerging is a system that is messier, more disruptive to these reliable rules that have kept everything stable, kept the United States on top. And unfortunately, we know all too well what happens when great powers start competing with each other more and more over vital resources and vital geographies. In fact, most of the history of war is what happens when great powers are competing with each other. It's ugly, it's messy, it's violent. It provokes a zero-sum way of thinking, competition, racing to secure and control and exploit vital geographies, like strategic choke points that lead into the most important waterway on the planet. As this rivalry heats up, Djibouti's role is going to become more complex. Its government will continue to do what it's done, playing the big powers off each other, exploiting its great real estate to benefit itself. But I believe that there comes a point in every escalating conflict where you kind of have to choose sides. I want Djibouti to continue to embody the positive-sum thinking that has kept the world relatively stable these last...
I have a hot thing, but it's not even a hot... to me, it seems like when the countries, they always have like a bunch of people doing bad things, like terrorists or whatever, right? That are doing some things, right? If they did a better job at like controlling the like small groups that are doing bad, the same way as like, you know, when you have a protest, people are doing like the agitators, they did a better job at like saying, yo guys, stop doing this, make us look bad. Wouldn't that be a raw positive, everybody?
70 years, but it's definitely playing with a very delicate like a small balancing act, and there's a chance that it could stumble.
Guys, it's like a small group does bad things, and then people have to retaliate against like their entire country or something like that. No? It's like, shouldn't the country be like, yo guys, and try to control that small group better?
So, as you all know, I will be keeping an eye on the global order, as well as Djibouti, to try to see where this is going. To see if the great powers can continue to cooperate and compete, but cooperate. Or if we're heading back into the old days, where competition threatens to rip the world apart. I don't think it's inevitable, but it's going to take effort to avoid it.
Interesting.
Okay, so war is coming, I guess. Or just not, and nothing is going to happen again for like another 20 years. They say that war is coming, and it doesn't fucking come, man. Well, I like that, of course, but I mean, stop fucking lying, dick.